This program is brought to you by the following proud sponsors: Paulson Manufacturing, saving the eyes and lives of workers and first responders by manufacturing the highest quality and most reliable safety protective gear in the world. And by the Alltech Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns.
More and more consumers across the world, whether they are business customers or end users, are demanding American-made products. If you've ever thought of going global to tap into the expanding international marketplace, then this segment is for you. Whether you're a startup business or an established manufacturer with a long track record of domestic success, my guest is going to share some valuable tips that could help you get started in the process of becoming a truly global business. His name is Chris Lynch, and he's my guest expert on this edition of Manufacturer's Corner. Hello and welcome again to Manufacturer's Corner. I'm Jeff Allen. My guest for this segment is Chris Lynch. He is the co-founder of the Community Vitalization Council, also known simply as Civic 180, which creates funds and manages programs to develop local business communities. Civic 180 has the expertise into business retention, entrepreneurship development, global business connections, and viral marketing. It develops sustainable funding streams to support programs in underserved communities. Mr. Lynch was previously a U.S. State Department Foreign Service officer specializing in helping U.S. businesses with trade and investment issues overseas. He served at U.S. embassies in Germany, Spain, El Salvador, Chile, and Colombia. His last position before retiring was as U.S. Consul General to Hamburg, Germany from 1997 to 2001. And Chris Lynch, welcome. It's nice to have you here on Manufacturer's Corner today. Thanks for being our guest. Let's talk about it. It's never too early to start. 7 tips is what we're going to be giving our listeners today to building a global business from day one. And so if you're watching and you've got a pen or pencil handy and a piece of paper, we're going to give you 7 tips here. You can actually write those down. We'll have them on the screen here, but we'll be talking about them kind of here at length. So Chris, first of all, what I'd like to do is get an idea about what Civic 180 does. What is your organization all about, and who do you help?
Yeah, well, we focus on really local economic development, but our focus is on building business communities because we really think that's the way to go, and particularly a lot of focus on manufacturing communities, how we can get them to succeed in this very global economy that we're in right now.
And more businesses obviously are taking an interest in going global, and there are probably some, quite frankly, that should have more of an interest doing it because there are problems to be solved overseas. There are products that are in heavy demand, as we've talked about already. We've kind of touched on that. What are some of the common misconceptions that businesses have about their needs to become, rather than just simply a domestic or a local business, a global business? I mean, you've probably heard all of the excuses or maybe these misconceptions. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah, first of all, people think it's too complicated, and it really isn't that complicated. There are additional steps that you have to think through, but with that additional steps, there's also a tremendous amount of resources available that's just not available if you're doing a business exclusively domestically. Everything from marketing assistance to finance to just general strategies, how to move forward.
When it comes to hearing about certain types of, and we talked about misconceptions, certain types of difficulties that businesses have in common. Is there one in particular that kind of stands out that you kind of think, it's really not difficult to get past this. All you need to do is you need to have the right people in place. Is there one area that all businesses seem to have a real problem with?
I would say it's probably this concern about risk. You're thinking, okay, I'm sending my goods way out there across the ocean, And am I going to get paid? Are the products going to get lost in the process? Is there going to be some sort of sudden change where suddenly the market's turned upside down? And what I was referring to before was that there's a whole series of assistance out there, not only from government, nonprofit, but also from very qualified private sector providers, that you can essentially line up a whole series of strategies so that you can lay off the risk. And in fact, you would have less risk in shipping, say, from Riverside to Ulaanbaatar than you would have, say, from Riverside to Corona. And it's simply managed to sequencing those products and strategies in the right kind of way that will virtually eliminate all of the questions that you have about risk, about uncertainties. And that's perhaps the biggest area where a lot of companies can really benefit from this. It's not that risky, but you have to be conscious about how you plan your strategy.
We're probably going to touch on that again here in just a minute.
Yeah.
But so let's go ahead and let's kind of plunge right into it. First of all, tip number one, you need to define yourself as a global company. This is the first of 7 tips we'll talk about today. So how does a company kind of start to do that, Chris?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we kind of, our thinking is kind of confined into this box. We have this comfort zone, and we know what to tell people when we're on an elevator about our company. Well,
Right.
I sell these widgets, and I do business here in California, but I ship all across the state. How do you start to define your business on a global level?
It's a mentality. You don't think of this as your sales department. Oh, and then there's the one person who's responsible for international. You have everybody thinking in sales about that. When you're thinking about the design and engineering of a product, you're thinking not only about meeting, say, U.S. specifications, say a UL certification, but also what is going to be needed in the other countries. And when you think of marketing, you think of your product. How is it that my product will appeal to a certain market? Well, you have to think a little bit larger than what would it be like to appeal to a Chinese market, or to a Latin American market, or a European market. So and different strategies, you can work those all into your product design and your marketing campaigns. But again, it's just defining yourself. It's that mentality that you think of yourself as global and not just, say, a California company or an Arkansas company that happens to do business internationally.
And that's something that you can do immediately. I mean, it's not something that costs any money, but it's basically a change of mindset. Mm-hmm. And it's a permanent change of mindset that requires some buy-in on the part of everyone that works with the organization.
And it's got to come from the top down to the lowest position. It has to be from your shipping clerk all the way up to the CEO, and people have to be reminded that, and it has to be sort of built into your mission that this is our market is the world. And it has to have leadership from the top all the way to the bottom, and it has to be constantly, as you say, reinforced throughout the entire company.
And it's you're thinking of just some common situations. I mean, this reinforcement can come during times of conversations you have with your suppliers over the phone, with somebody, a networking function at a chamber of commerce mixer. Mm-hmm. Anytime something comes up, is you want to take and you want to reinforce in the minds of prospects or those that you network with that is in fact what you do, and that you're a global company.
And just put it there. As soon as you put up a website, you're doing global business. I mean, it's the World Wide Web.
It's an interesting point. It is the World Wide Web, and so you don't even necessarily have to use the word global. I mean, it certainly is something you do, but you're global really from the get-go because people all over the world have access.
Right,
to your
but
site.
it's reincorporated. It's incorporating that mentality into your global processes.
That's a really, really good point. Let's talk about tip number 2. Your market development efforts should be global. Okay, so how do we start there?
I was saying back earlier, you have to think about when you're going to be defining markets, to think not only about where's the next state I'm going to go into or the next sort of niche, but how is it would I be able to expand into other markets? What would I need, for example, to get into the Mexican market or to the Canadian market? Those are frequently the first sort of steps that companies take because they're close and they feel somewhat more controllable. Okay, then you have to start thinking about then what about different regions of the world? Where would I be more competitive, less competitive? Mm-hmm. And doing that requires a lot of thinking, market research. But again, as I say, there's kind of the resources that are out there.
And I would imagine too, is depending on the product that you have, and we talked about Canada and Mexico you touched on as being kind of the simple places to start, probably from a logistics standpoint, I would think, at any rate. But depending on the product that a company has, it may actually have different potential uses or markets for that product that implement that product that it makes, depending on where in the world that they might have a client base. So that's another thing that I would think that one probably has to consider too. Okay, this has industrial uses here, and this has consumer issues over or use applications over here. So those are also things to probably think about, I would imagine too. Tip number 3, your manufacturing and packaging processes should be acceptable outside the U.S. There's a little bit of thought that's required when we're talking about this, isn't there?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's go first of all to manufacturing processes. Okay. ISO is, for example, much more important outside of the United States than inside the United States. As I mentioned before, I'd spent a lot of time in Germany and in Spain. And in Europe, for example, every product out there has to have that sort of ISO certification to it. And more importantly, that ISO certification allows you to get then what they call a CE certification that allows the product to be sold on a retail basis inside the European Union. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, once you get that certification, then, for example, the world sort of breaks down generally into certification 2 different areas. One are sort of the American standards, which may be UL or other kinds of manufacturing standards, and the other are the CE. And so you want to at least have those 2 that are certified there, and it just makes your marketing easier at that point. There may be local requirements at that point, but you can then make sure that your products actually meeting those standards.
Chris, would you agree that the ISO certification process for those companies that are ISO certified, that they have a competitive advantage when it comes to marketing overseas then? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
Correct?
Yeah, okay. No, that's, and it's not only that the product will be recognized and the process will be recognized in the other country, but I really think it's very useful for the company in general to, again, sort of incorporate these processes. These are like part of being that thinking global, because you're then thinking about a global standard of way of doing things. Now, the other part of that tip is about the packaging. And that's an area that there's a lot of specific issues with. And this is where you're going to have to get some information from outside resources. And it can be either from consultants. It can also be, say, from the U.S. Commercial Service, the Small Business Administration. There are a variety of resources for those. But the packaging is perhaps one of the biggest areas. You have to have, and it countries vary widely on this, not only how it's the contents are listed, it may be requiring that you have information on there and that's in metric units, not in English units. Simple things like that. Particularly if it's food products, that gets very, very complicated. Europe is very in interest at this point and are almost obsessed with GMO issues, yes. And you have to have that clearly labeled. It's in other markets, similar kinds of restriction. So you have to think about the packaging, and in terms of the packaging, you have to sort of allow the kind of space on there where you can localize your particular product and packaging.
Okay. And another interesting thing, and this is just a detail, but it's probably an important one, there are some American companies that have introduced their products overseas. And the name of the product actually had a negative connotation or meaning in that nation's language. And so you want to make sure that you have someone who can
the classic
translate
example
for you.
of that is the Chevy Nova. But when you get into Latin America and the Spanish-speaking countries, Nova means no va, which means it doesn't go. So that was a real marketing problem for them when somebody finally realized that people were making jokes about it.
Yeah, but there are other products also too, as you know. But yeah, that's really, really important as well. But so packaging is really essential. Recently, and I'll just kind of mention this just kind of as an aside, but on a related note, I was recently at a manufacturing trade show, and found out that it was almost mind-blowing that there are so many companies that are involved in packaging and labeling, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. It's probably one of the most competitive business spaces for manufacturers out there. So there are companies that are out there willing to help, and you'd mentioned some organizations that are low-cost or no-cost types of ways to find out more about it in order to get some consultation on that. And of course, if you've got money to spend, you could also contact probably an international marketing firm that could probably help you with that as well.
Yeah.
But that's all
Worth those kind of investments, or it can be investments of time or money, are things you want to do before you get into the market, so that you know what you're going to be getting to. No surprises.
Exactly. And so and to help kind of eliminate some of those high costs up front, try to use as many of those free or no cost resources, low cost resources as possible. The next tip number 4, you should identify one or more logistics companies that can help you with your paperwork and your shipping.
Logistics companies are really your biggest ally. It's the FedExes, the UPS. It's even interesting things like U.S. Postal Service. Those 3 organizations, for example, all have very extensive parts of their websites which help you with the documentation. And one of the concerns was, particularly pre-internet days, was that you would have this mound of papers that you would have to fill out, bills of lading and so forth, and always the worry that if one thing were out of place, that the shipment would be rejected or stuck in the port, or maybe some customs inspector was looking for a little extra money to line his pocket and would find some reason to do that. Now with these logistics agencies, the companies, that they really help facilitate all of that, and these kinds of problems are greatly reduced. You can go online and you can, it will guide you through all the steps, the things that you need to list your products and so forth. And then if you say, I want to send my particular product to, Uzbekistan, and I've never gotten anything there before, it will go through and will tell you, all of the requirements, and more importantly, will tell you about the taxes that you'll have to expect, and other kinds of sort of related taxes and tariffs issues, so that you can then approximately figure out, I'm going to be shipping my product at, say $20 FOB from here in the United States, and it will be, by the time it arrives there, it'll be like $42, at their delivery point. So that kind of greatly reduces the uncertainty at this point. So logistics companies are going to be your best allies in terms of, particularly for manufacturers.
And because they want your business, and obviously it's very, very competitive out there. But I did think it was interesting how you mentioned the United States Postal Service, and a lot of people think of them as kind of the black sheep when it comes to probably international shipping, but they're very heavily involved
for small businesses, it is really a great help, because you can say that you're a manufacturer making small little parts and so forth. Well, you can have these small shipping containers, boxing, so forth. They'll walk you through the process. You can go online, and your postman comes by and picks them up.
Perfect, and it doesn't get any more convenient than that. Step number 5. You should have reliable and knowledgeable international finance and insurance partners. This, to me, is probably among the most important of the 7 steps.
And I was talking about laying off risk, and that's where it comes in. By understanding the insurance and the finance, that's where you can really help not only protect yourself, but to figure out some of the costing issues involved. You want to have, there are any number of products, for example, on the insurance side, which will help you to eliminate the risk. For example, one of the great governmental programs is actually from Ex-Im Bank, where you can get a product insured that it will be delivered and that you will be paid for that particular product. And I think they insure up to 80 or 90% of the value. So that one is just a simple insurance product. I know one company that had send products to Brazil, then charged that it was equivalent to, I think, about a 3 to 5% fee or something like that, and they charged their customer 15%. So they were making profit on the markup for the insurance, which simply guaranteed their thing. So there's some tricks there. The other part is on the finance side, and again, there are lots of finance that you can get, not only for that's in transit, but also say you get a large order and you're able to, you need to get some working capital to process that order. These are available from a variety of both, from banks, from a lot of very non-traditional lenders, also government agencies. In terms of, for example, like the government agencies out there, you can basically arrange it so that you have your working capital up front, and then you have the financing in transit, and then you can also arrange for in the back end that you can get your payment guaranteed and so forth, and so that you can you then lay it out from end to end so that you have a good safe process all the way through. One of the interesting things about the finance, particularly say from a group like Ex-Im Bank or SBA, is that it's actually easier to get export financing than it is traditional financing. A lot of these, for example, require the company would only be in business, say, for a year, rather than the traditional 3 years. Then you can also, in terms of the finance, get the companies through groups like Ex-Im and so forth. You can get the financing at lower costs, and it's lower qualification terms than they are, say, for traditional kinds of lending.
So you might want to get your start there then with Ex-Im Bank, which is Export-Import Bank.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, very good. And you can just look them up online. And again, it's so important. Talk about being able to set the table. And I really like the methodical nature in which they work. Talking about having the money up front, and then the financing part of it in transit, and then at the end, it just sounds like. It sounds like there are certain tools and resources out there that want to make it easy for businesses to conduct business overseas and sell their products overseas. You similarly need a good legal team to support you. That's tip number 6. A good legal team, representation, also critical. And maybe it goes without saying, but I mean, why is this so important when you're doing business overseas?
And when the key word there is team, because traditionally your one lawyer that you're dealing with probably is not going to have the range of expertise that you would need. Some areas that you would need expertise in. Contract law, because particularly when you get into international contracts, there's a whole set of norms, guidelines, ways that you resolve disputes that do not take place under traditional U.S. kind of operations. Another area that you want to do is to have somebody help you with the finance side, particularly if you have a complicated financial situation, or say if you are actually making an investment in the other country. Again, there are ways to lay off the risk in some of that investment, but you need a good legal team. And another area that's it becomes important in international is going to be in your intellectual property, your copyrights, your patents. And when I was overseas at U.S. embassies, that was one area that we were constantly running into problems with. When I was in El Salvador, we had a serious problem with local companies that had registered U.S. trademarks and then sort of sat on them. And then when the U.S. company would come in, they would demand an exorbitant payment to get back their own trademark. Similarly, on patent sides, this gets particularly a lot in the medical pharmaceutical side, where in the smaller countries, somebody will go around, basically take the patent and register it locally, and then the actual patent owner loses control over it. Or you get into an issue that's very frequent with China, is that China, and not to see them, but a lot of other countries, where you come in and you have the claim to your intellectual property, but you can't get it enforced in the local markets and so forth. So you need a good legal team who knows what to do in those cases, how to guarantee that they're going to get your legal rights enforced, and what are the peculiarities with the law in each of the countries in which you're doing business.
So I think what's key is to remember that just because you have U.S. copyright and patent protection, don't take it for granted that you're going to be protected overseas, because you probably won't be. And in order to check into that, you're going to have that legal team standing
and that's
by.
when it comes back to thinking global again. You started this at the beginning. You
Yes.
start thinking, okay, what am I going to need in terms of my intellectual property strategy internationally?
Good points. And this is tip number 7 on our list of 7. You need to build international into your company processes. It may seem like you're being redundant there with thinking global from the get-go, but talk to us a little bit about this.
It's the ways that you're going to be conducting business at that point. How do you do your invoicing? How do you do your web strategy, your online strategies? How do you do your product development internally? So again, it's taking all of these separate parts and actually building them into the processes of your company. You have to be able to work with to identify a specific processing there that are going to be slightly different than what you would have if you're just thinking your domestic company. It's a broader view. But again, it's reinforcing those strategies from the top on down to the bottom. In this case, and actually carrying out in terms of processes, standard operating procedures, et cetera.
So we've gone through the 7 tips, Chris, and what I want to do here, we've got just a few minutes here before we wrap things up. You are launching a new program. Tell us a little bit about this and how this might benefit some of those folks who operate businesses throughout California and Southern California, and how this may help them grow their business into a global business.
Yeah. Civic 180 is teamed up late last year with an accelerator that's a business accelerator where they actually work with companies to actually go through the launch process. But we are teaming up, and one of these, particularly with a group out of Orange County, California, called K5 Launch, which a lot of its founders are members of the Tech Coast Angel Investors Group. And they've had a lot of experience of hundreds of companies that they've worked with and actually get them to the launch process. And when I was talking with their founders, that one of the areas that they felt they didn't have enough was actually getting on the international side. And that's where we came up with this concept of international from the get-go. So what we do with these companies is we work with them very intensively, and it can be anywhere from about 4 to 6 months. But we not only go through the typical business acceleration process, working with them on marketing and strategy development, and then getting them ready for funding. But we also, at that time, also have them build in the international processes, that tip 7. We do that at the very beginning of the process. Now, we've worked with both pure startups, and we've worked with companies that already have existing products out there.
Okay.
And so it can work for either of them. We work with companies all over Southern California. And frankly, it's a very effective process for any sort of company that is really thinking about shifting strategies, be it an existing company or a company that's going to be just starting out.
So, Chris, if we've got people that are interested in finding out more about the International Business Accelerator program that you're involved in, or more about how Civic 180 can help them out, who should they call, and what is your contact information?
It's contact me. Our website is civic180.org, and you can go on there and find information about that. My email address is clynch for Chris Lynch, clynch@civic180.org. And if people want to call me, it's 949-236-9637.
There you go. Well, Chris Lynch, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us a little bit about how to grow your business globally from the get-go. It's been a nice chat. Thank you so much. Hope to have you back on again.
Thanks.
That's it for this edition of Manufacturer's Corner. Thanks again to my guest, Chris Lynch, founder of Civic 180 at civic180.org, for joining us today. Now, if you're a manufacturer, policymaker, or educator and you'd like to take part in our discussions as a guest or member of a future panel discussion, please complete our contact form on the contact page at manufacturerscorner.com. You can also call us at 951-697-3098. And Manufacturer's Corner is now welcoming advertisers. So if you'd like what we do here and you'd like to sponsor our programs, we'd be happy to talk with you about that as well. Again, just visit the contact page at manufacturerscorner.com, or you can call us at 951-697-3098. We'll get back to you with the information you need, and we'd be happy to add you to our email list to update you about future programs and events. For Manufacturer's Corner, I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks so much for watching.
This program was brought to you by the following proud sponsors: Paulson Manufacturing, saving the eyes and lives of workers and first responders by manufacturing the highest quality and most reliable safety protective gear in the world. And by the All-Tech Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns.